In China, rapid economic growth is taking its toll. Air pollution levels are hitting record highs, endangering lives, especially children's. With an increasingly vocal and restless public, the government is promising to spend billions to clean up the environment. I'm Steve Chow. On this edition of 101 East, we ask if years of commitment to economic growth has left it too late for China to clear the air.
A toxic cloud chokes China's capital. The city skyline dissolves behind a sulfur veil. What should look like this is often like this. Alien skies have become the status quo for many cities in China, as the fallout from China's breakneck drive toward growth hits home.
None of this development should happen at the expenses of people's health. If that's the case, then the basic question would be asked: what's the point for all this development if people are paying for all this material consumption, with their health, with their life?
Beijing's air quality has worsened dramatically in recent years. The first half of the year saw only 2 days in 5 with air deemed healthy. In January, pollution soared to alarming levels. Soupy skies enveloped the city with a shroud of vehicle exhaust and factory emissions. Readings of the smallest and deadliest airborne particles skyrocketed to more than 40 times recommended safety levels. Residents were warned to stay indoors. The smog took on a name: the Airpocalypse.
Beijing is surrounded by mountains, and this geographical area just happens to be such that the air sits here. And from time to time, it really has no ability to be swept out to sea. So one problem is that those initial pollutants mix in the air and just stay here.
But the poisonous air is not confined to just Beijing. Decades of unfettered industrialization are transforming the way people across China live and breathe.
I think many other countries have gone through this air pollution problem, but in China, I think it is more serious at this moment because the sheer scale of its industry and of the size of the population. So it means that more emission, more polluting sources, and also more people will be exposed to such a pollution problem.
Toxic air is ranked as the 4th biggest risk factor for deaths in China. A recent study calculated that air pollution played a role in 1.2 million untimely deaths in China in 2010.
Air pollution has a great impact on the respiratory system. If this kind of weather lasts, it will do a lot of harm to people who live and work in Beijing, such as lung cancer. Morbidity and death from respiratory problems, including lung cancer, have increased in recent years.
Those most vulnerable to the noxious atmosphere are the young. Research has found that high levels of air pollution can cause permanent lung damage to children, and that exposure during pregnancy can lead to anxiety, depression, and attention span problems.
If teenagers live in this environment for long, their whole life will be influenced. Children have morning exercises and class break exercises every day. They walk a long way to school. They can't avoid polluted air. Wearing a gauze mask is not the way to solve the problem.
These health concerns are changing the way an entire generation is coming of age. Worried parents are reluctant to let their children play outdoors, while schools cancel outside activities and field trips when pollution levels rise. Some schools have taken extraordinary measures to offer children a place to play. The International School of Beijing, attended mostly by children of diplomats and expat professionals, has built large air-filtered domes for children to get their daily recreation. But for the vast majority of urban Chinese children, a bad air day means a day without play. In a studio in Beijing, 3-year-old Xinghuo is taking a drawing class. His mother says he has breathing difficulties and rarely enjoys a day in the sun.
A few months before his second birthday, he had been sick for a while. He had a cold and a runny nose all the time with lots of sneezing. I just treated it like it's a common cold, until one day he was out of breath and panting very badly. After the doctor saw him, he straight away diagnosed it as asthma and told me my son was having real trouble breathing.
Xinghuo's asthma attacks grew worse and more frequent, and trips to the hospital became routine. His family has tried both Chinese and Western medicine in hope for a remedy.
I worry about my son more and more. This current weather environment already makes adults feel quite uncomfortable. So it's a real challenge for a sick boy like him, who has a weak cardiopulmonary and unhealthy respiratory system.
Like many Chinese youngsters in Beijing, Xinghuo faces the prospect of a childhood spent mostly indoors.
Basically, I won't allow him to be outside in winter unless the weather is good and the sun is shining after strong winds in Beijing. I will bring him downstairs to bathe in the sun for a little while, which is very rare. When the weather is bad, I will choose an indoor playground for his activities and won't send him to kindergarten. Especially on severely polluted days, I will keep him at home. He will feel very unhappy and ask to go outside. I feel really sorry and don't know what to do. I bought good quality masks last year. However, even grown-ups don't want to live in a world of masks, not to mention children. I'm thinking about changing my job in 1 or 2 years. Although I have a decent job now, I would abandon it for my son. Compared to other things like quality of education, the air quality and environment are the most important things for my child.
It's a dilemma facing many parents of young Chinese children: how to protect them from environmental hazards without isolating them from friends and activity. 5-year-old Malaya has started kindergarten in Beijing, a world apart from the pure air of the Himalayas for which he was named. Like most boys his age, Malaya does not like to sit idle for too long. For his mother, keeping him locked up at home is not an option.
I'm not willing to reduce Malaya's outdoor activities because of the air problem. What I can do is to take him to the mountain to play as often as possible. The air is much better there than downtown, and he can exercise. Children's health has a lot to do with exercise.
On clean air days, Malaya and his classmates seem unaffected by the pollution. But when the smog returns, so will the coughs, the wheezing, and the trips to the clinic. It's an environment Malaya's mother won't tolerate.
You can see many children coughing. Some children can't sleep well at night because of the cough. Then the lungs become inflamed and they have to go to a doctor. But antibiotics have bad effects on children, so the only way to solve the problem is to escape the pollution.
Many parents who have a choice are choosing to leave. Henrik and Bettina Prestorff are moving back to Germany. They and their children came to Beijing 4.5 years ago when Henrik's telecom company transferred him. But then their 16-year-old son Merton began coughing and having shortness of breath. Soon, things took a turn for the worse.
One day that was a particularly bad day. I got a call in the office So the message has slightly changed. It was originally that he had trouble breathing, and when I received the message was he had stopped breathing. So I tell you, I was really scared. So I rushed to school, which is 20 minutes from my office, and he was lying there, and he was, thank God, he was still breathing, but very heavily and seriously under pain.
After that, on highly polluted days, the Presdorfs kept their son home from school. In his last term, Merton missed 25% of classes.
For me, the worst days have been when actually we decided to send him to school, and while he was in school, the pollution was rising. And I knew at some point the level is where he can maybe have the same seizure again. And then I was just sitting next to the phone, sitting there waiting.
Henrik says his son's health problems convinced him not to renew his contract in Beijing. His children have already moved back to Germany, and he and his wife will soon follow.
For me, the very thought that you are living in a place where you have to filter the air before you can breathe it. I mean, this is quite some thought. For us, it's fairly easy, right? Assignment is finished and we can leave, and it was an experience, but we have the choice of leaving. People who live here cannot leave.
Until last year, most Chinese had no access to readings of the most dangerous pollution they were inhaling, the tiny particulate matter only 2.5 micrometers thick, known as PM 2.5. Then, after intense public pressure, the Chinese government finally agreed to release PM 2.5 data in major cities. Now anyone with a mobile phone can access pollution levels with the touch of a thumb. While most city dwellers can find out how much pollution is in the air, few have a clear idea exactly what is going into their lungs. Those PM 2.5 particles are so small, they are 30 times thinner than a human hair. Greenpeace East Asia conducted an experiment earlier in the year to literally see what is in the air. With support from the Beijing University School of Public Health, Greenpeace outfitted several volunteers with a device that simulated human breathing and captured the tiniest particles on a filter.
Public would really love to know that what's really damaging their health, what's really are there in the small particles. So we did this research to trying to figure out that in Beijing's air pollution was hazardous materials are contained, elements are contained in these small particles and where they come from.
Each volunteer wore the device for several days. Then the filter was sent to a lab to be analyzed. The results were frightening. According to Greenpeace, the air on highly polluted days contained a carcinogenic cocktail: arsenic, lead, mercury, and selenium. We decided to try our own informal experiment. We asked our volunteer, Henry Hu, a bartender originally from Sichuan province, if he would wear an air sampling device while going about his routine on his days off.
Because of my work, I usually sleep during the day and work at night. But when I have free time, I hang out with my friends, and we sometimes go bike riding together. Sometimes I have trouble breathing and my nose is always dry. I have to wear a mask on my way to work. But inside the pub, the air is good. I can stay here another 2 or 3 years, but if it's still like this in the future, I'll have to go back to my hometown. The air is cleaner there, and the development is better than it is here.
After 2 days of air testing, we took the device back to the lab. The results were disturbing. This is what goes into a person's lungs in less than 48 hours on heavily polluted days in Beijing. It came as a shock to Henry. Beijing has taken modest steps to reduce air pollution, setting limits on cars and banishing most heavy industry to the surrounding province of Hebei. But until recently, there had been no concrete efforts to reduce dependence on coal, which is responsible for nearly half of PM 2.5 toxins. A Deutsche Bank report estimated that at current coal consumption rates, air pollution would worsen by 70% in the next decade.
It does impact people's life quality very much. And we think the solution is very clear that the government should tackle the fossil fuel use, especially the coal use. And this is something that people are expecting. Nobody would love to live under this kind of air pollution for another 20 years. People cannot wait that long.
In September, the Chinese government announced a new strategy to reduce particulate matter in the air around the capital by 25% over the next 4 years. The plan imposes some limits on coal use and steel production and requires high-polluting vehicles to be taken off the roads. An increasingly aware Chinese public has grown restless over the deterioration of their local environment. According to a survey, 80% of Chinese believe environmental protection is now more important than economic development. A number of attempts to build new industrial projects have run into strong opposition. Kunming, the provincial capital of the southwestern province of Yunnan, is nicknamed the City of Eternal Spring. It boasts one of the best air quality environments in the country, according to the Chinese NGO Friends of Nature. It's a quality that residents are keen to protect. In May, plans to build an oil refinery project in a neighboring county drove thousands of Kunming residents to the streets. Protesters voiced concern over reports the refinery would produce large quantities of a carcinogenic chemical, paraxylene. Police stayed on the sidelines, and by the end of the day, Kunming's mayor addressed the crowd, promising public hearings and equal dialogue.
The main reason behind these protests is the lack of government transparency in the decision-making about sensitive industrial projects. There is little public participation. People knew nothing about these projects when the decision was made. Has it been scientifically justified? People have no idea.
While the protest may have initially seemed a victory for public disclosure, in its wake, authorities have warned leading activists to stay silent and monitored their movements. Activists say the government has not lived up to its promises to consult the public before going ahead with the project.
We didn't oppose the petrochemical industry because we simply didn't like it. For important projects in society, especially using fossil fuels, there should be more opportunities for public participation, and we should have more discussion. It cannot be a black box operation anymore.
Kunming residents need only look outside the city limits to justify their fears. Da'ao village, to the city's northwest, is wedged between two titanium factories that locals say smother their homes in a lethal fog.
If people walk in the village, everyone covers their mouths. It is very bad. For children coming home after school, they just scream to each other, "Here comes the poisonous smoke, run, run." People will hide indoors with the doors and windows closed, but we can still smell the choking smoke.
Villager Wang Xiangmin says his daughter has developed a chronic cough. He says one of his neighbors died of blood cancer a year after the factories opened. He's pleaded with local authorities to shut down the factories, but he says nothing has changed.
I'm not scared of being beaten or put in jail. We are going to die here. It is just a matter of time before we die.
Feeling they have nothing to lose, more Chinese are standing up against an invasion of industry. Governments that fail to consider environmental concerns in their growth blueprints risk triggering a public backlash.
I think all this public pressure have eventually pushed the government to finally make the decision that some of the regions which are pursuing their economic growth, at the expenses of the air quality, they must stop. They must change course.
Ma Jun is perhaps China's most influential environmental activist. He's a former journalist who gave up his bylines to target polluting companies' production lines.
At the beginning, I feel that I could not do much, but one thing I could do is to spread this information, to try to cross this message to my fellow citizens. And I do trust that no matter how big the problem is, if many of the 1.3 billion Chinese people gain the awareness and decided to join the efforts, we still have chance to make a real change.
Ma began with an ambitious project, assembling a national database of polluting companies. He combed through official records at every level of government, eventually compiling a list of hundreds of thousands of violations.
We put all this information together into our China pollution map database, and we give free access to the public to all this information. What we found is when people gained this access, the companies who used to pay fines year after year without solving their problem, some of them started feeling the pressure.
This pressure has led some multinational brands to clean up their supply chains. Now, Ma is taking the same approach with a target once considered off-limits, China's powerful state-owned enterprises, which operate some of the nation's largest polluters. It's a riskier endeavor, one that could imperil years of effort. But Ma insists it's a step he must take.
At certain moment, we do experience some extremely harsh pressure, and with those moments, we kind of feel that, what's the point? Why do I give up my normal job and started doing this? And but in the meantime, I got recharged each time because we have chance to do our field investigation. I saw in those valleys about how the people get suffered from the air and water emission. I thought beside the deathbed of the victims, how they suffered, how much they really want the problem to be resolved.
这个是钢厂主要在晚上才操作。钢厂没这一阵停的，那都是那儿有小冶炼厂。小冶炼厂晚上也炼。晚上这村里边墙里边出不了气儿。晚上对，好像这岛上好像一照灯一照，好像一层雾似的。
Today, Ma is leading a team of Chinese media to investigate suspected polluters in Hebei province outside Beijing. Hebei produces more than 1/8 of all the steel in the world, and its cities plunge regularly to the bottom of China's air quality rankings.
那你们向相关的方面反映过这个问题吗？反映过一次有跟那个没人管是的。这个钢厂对你们有没有什么影响？
怎么没影响了呀？没影响的。
没影响，这压大的都有什么？
We want this data to be shared with the public. We want all these major polluters to be put under public supervision. If this data could be violation records, could be accessed by the public at real time, then it will be so much riskier for the local mayors to try to interfere with the enforcement of the local environmental agencies.
The sky may be bleak, but Ma sees hopeful signs. He believes heightened public awareness, along with greater government transparency, point to an opportunity for change.
I think China at this moment is suffering from serious environmental challenges, and it matters to not just this generation, but the generations to come. We still have gaps in our environmental governance, which prevent the solution of all this problem. But in the meantime, if all the stakeholders work together, we can still solve this massive environmental problem. We can still, find back our lost blue sky and clean water.
It's a dream that environmentalists say will likely take more than a decade, and only then if the government makes some tough decisions. But with a population ever more weary of stifling skies, the decision may not be theirs alone.